Record.
Got it. Okay. So last week in the Torah portion, we discussed a tragedy in the scope of Jewish history when the Jews were frightened and turned off by the idea of taking Israel, the promised land, and they rejected it. And God said to them, you don't want it, you can't have it. You're going to be 40 years here in the desert. Next generation will be able to go into Israel. So whereas the original plan, as it was presented, was that the Jews will come out of slavery, get the Torah, and they'll go to Israel, which really shouldn't have taken more than, a few months, 7 weeks till Sinai, and then the trek to Israel wasn't that far. The reality is that it's not that they lost their way, but God said you're not going to get it. Now, also, I guess just for the timeline of it, it's important. I think it helps our understanding that the Jews had left, obviously, at Passover time in the spring, and then by the following Passover, so 7 weeks after that, they were actually 6 weeks later, they were at the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Mountain. 7 weeks later, they got the Torah. Because of all the drama that went on, the golden calf and the tablets, breaking the tablets, and then the building of the tabernacle, by their first anniversary of celebrating their liberation, they're still there at the Sinai, on Sinai. They haven't gotten moving yet. But around this time of year, actually, they start to move towards, in that second year, in other words, their second year in the desert, they start to move towards Israel. Send spies come back, they denigrate it, and we spoke about it last week. We'll speak about it again this week soon to see how it leads to this week's Torah portion. And then after the tragedy of the spies, the next Torah portion, and even though the Torah does not go in chronological order as a rule, but chronologically we're told, and we'll see that here, shortly after the episode with the spies, there's a rebellion in the ranks. Now, the Jews are in the desert for 40 years. We don't know a lot of what went on in the 40 years. We actually, there's like 38 years in middle that we know, or 37 and a half, we'll be dealing with it, but there's very little we know of what went on for most of the years there. We do know that Moses, before he passes away, talks about it being constantly, battered and tested and challenged by the Jews. So we know a lot of they weren't an easy crowd. We weren't an easy crowd. And this went on for 40 years. But when the Torah selects episodes to teach us, Torah is not a history book. The Torah is selecting episodes that will be fundamentally instructive for us for history, instructive to us. So that goes for the spies. The situation that we spoke about last week and that we read in the Torah yesterday has a lot of detail that's not usually found in Torah, because Torah is very, very tersely written. But the idea is very much that all of that is instructive to us for history. And so the same thing goes for Korach, because if you think about it, the Jews have gotten a Torah and they're slaves. They've been slaves for hundreds of years. They're not necessarily in the greatest cerebral, spiritual, or academic shape to be able to properly focus and digest what the Torah is giving them, what Moses is telling them, what God is telling them. And these are, excuse me 1 second, sorry. I'm in the middle of the Zoom, I'm sorry. No, but they'll be here soon. Okay, thank you. Sorry, there's a bar mitzvah, I think it's coming soon. So these are part of what the Torah is teaching us, is about the Jews struggle to get a clear understanding of what Torah is supposed to be, because even smart or spiritual people, they need to adjust and to be guided into where Torah wants to take them. And the spies, as I mentioned last week, had a certain perspective. They wanted to stay in more spiritual cocoon of the desert. They thought that was a value over going out and building farms and going to Israel and building farms and investing themselves in a material world that has a lot of shallowness to it. They were wrong, but they had a perspective. Korach is going to come with a different perspective. So let's start. First, understanding Korach, and I want to share a screen just to talk about who Korach was, because Korach is an individual. He was a leader of the Jewish people, but it wasn't only about him. He led the rebellion, but it was about people who felt like him. So let's look at this a second. So see over here, just for our context, you have Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebecca, Jacob and his wives. Those are the early generations of our patriarchs and matriarchs. And then I just took this off the internet. And then Jacob has 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. One of them is Levi. The Levites, they're called Levites, those are from Levi. They were traditionally the more spiritual, even when they were slaves in Egypt, they were tending to the spiritual needs of the nation. Levi has 3 sons. One's called Gershon, Kahos, and Merari. And Kahos has 4 sons. These 4. Amram, who has Aaron, Miriam, and Moses. Amram is a big deal because, right, these 3 prophets, Aaron, Miriam, and Moses, are all born from him. These are brothers and sisters. Moses we know, Aaron we know. I think we know about all of these. And so Moses is the son of Amram, who's the son of Kahos, who's the son of Levi. They're all from the Levite tribe. Aaron is also from the Levite tribe, but as time goes on in the desert, and even before the events that we are going to speak about today, he and his kids are chosen to be a Kohen. The Kohen, which is not a tribe, it's a subset of Levi, who are not just public servants, but they are priests for the nation. We'll get into the Kohen, maybe we got into it already once. But so Aaron, Miriam, and Moses are fundamentally part of the Levite tribe. Aaron will end up being selected to be the Kohens, and he himself becomes a Kohen Gadol, which means is the high priest. Korach is their first cousin. He's the son of Yitzhar, Kahos, and Levi. Now, this will come up a little later. We can come back to it. The youngest of the children of Kahos' sons is named Uziel, and he has kids down here. Okay, so now let's just go to, let me stop this share, and we'll go to the source notes. Okay, so as the Torah opens up in this week's Torah portion, we find that Korach leads a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. What do they want? What is their complaint? What is their objective? It's not clear. There seem to be shifting objectives, which sometimes happens when people don't want to be honest about what they want. Is what is it that you want? What they want. So one of the things the Torah tells us is in the beginning of this week's Torah portion is that they assembled against Moses and Aaron. In other words, Korach and the rabble rousers he got together. It says, you take too much upon yourselves, for the entire congregation are all holy. The Lord is in the midst. So why do you raise yourself above the Lord's assembly? So Korach is saying, who made you boss? Now, it was pretty obvious that they'd come out of Egypt. Moses led them out of Egypt. God's talking to Moses. They spoke at Sinai, and God gave them the Torah at Sinai and said, Moses is, he's the man. That he's going to be the person I'm trusting with teaching the Torah. So it really wasn't a question, but still saying this. I don't like this. There's something we find problematic with the fact that both of you, Moses and Aaron, Moses is a leader, Aaron is the high priest, are somehow above the fray. Now, let's remember also that they're all Levites. So Korach himself was a part of kind of a spiritual class, a priestly class, even if he wasn't a Kohen, but the Levites themselves were something. So he's talking against having this, seems to be talking against having this tiered structure, a leadership within the Jewish community when he himself was part of the leadership. Rashi, primary comment on the Torah, comments and says, if you have taken kingship for yourself, meaning to Moses, you should not have chosen priesthood for your brother, the Kohen, for your brother. This is nepotism. Why? You're the king. In other words, you're the unchallenged leader, and now the high priest is Aaron. Remember, you're not the only one who heard at Sinai. I am the Lord your God. The entire congregation heard it. God gave the Torah to all of us, and therefore, why do you raise yourselves up above everyone else? And you have to understand what was their issue, because it was kind of a fact. Now, we'll look at Rashi also in these verses. Rashi lays out a more detailed problem of what got on the Korach's skin. It says he envied the chieftainship of Elitzaphan, the son of Uziel. So I just want to stop this for a second and go back to something else I showed you before. So, because I didn't want to get too far, so you'd have to remember. Remember, Kohath has 4 sons. Moses and Aaron and Miriam are the son of the oldest, are children of the oldest son. The second son, Korach, is the oldest of the second son. Uziel is the youngest. Elitzaphan is a child of the youngest. Now, Elitzaphan ended up being a leader of this family, of the Kohath, the Elitzaphan family. So this is what Rashi tells us that Korach had a problem with. He said, we're first cousins, but you took a younger first cousin over me for a position of leadership. He envied the chieftainship of Elitzaphan, the son of Uziel, whom Moses appointed as chieftain over the sons of Kohath by the divine word. Moses, they're all first cousins. And now he's saying, why did you take this from our youngest, from the youngest uncle, and one of his kids? I come next. The oldest was Amram. All his kids got special leadership roles. Miriam, Aaron, Miriam, Moses. What am I, chopped liver? He jumped over me to the youngest uncle, the youngest of the sons, and take one of his kids to be a leader in the family. Korach claimed my father and his brothers were 4 in number. Amram was the first. His 2 sons received greatness, one a king, another one a Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol meaning a high priest. Who is entitled to receive the second position? Is it not I, the son of Yitzhar, who is the second brother to Amram? And yet Moses he does an end run, pointed to the chieftainship of the son of his youngest brother. I hereby oppose him, and I will invalidate his word. So this, in here, we say, we're looking, and this is human nature often, he's presenting, on the face of it, presenting a case against this idea that there's any leadership, there's any loftiness to a role for Moses and Aaron, because everybody's beautiful. We're all one, and we all matter, which we do. What he's really gunning for is some leadership himself, right? As back in Russia, right? The communists said everybody's equal, but I'm more equal, and I'm going to control you. Now, just once we bring everyone down, I'm going to be in charge. So he was looking for some leadership himself, and he resented not having the leadership. So he figured, I'll bring them all down. Now, let's look at this. Go back. Now, here we say another issue, and this is because it happened right after the spies, and right after the spies, that they're told that they're going to spend 40 years in the desert. They're not going to go to Israel. So he says, hey, you have I'm complaining to you about your leadership too. You haven't even brought us to land flowing with milk and honey. You had promised we're going to go to Israel, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. We're messed up because you didn't manage to get us where you told us you were going to take us when we came out of Egypt. And this actually should have been a little bit different. If you jump to 6, we'll go back to 5 in a second. The Medrash tells us that this verse teaches us that Korach's rebellion took place after the episode with the spies, right? Because after they were denied entry into Israel, Korach blames that on Moses. So he's got a bunch of complaints. He says, who are you to be boss? He says, who are you to take? Why would you take the younger of our cousins to be a leader in the family and skip over me? And then there's another thing we find here. One of the things that when Moses addresses them, when he's challenged, he says, he speaks to the tribe of Levi. He says, God drew you near, and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. And now you seek the priesthood of being Kohen as well. So it seems that they were claiming, even though it's not clear from the Torah, from the scripture, that they were saying, why is there such a thing as Kohen? We want to all be Kohens. So they were challenging the system. They were challenging the tiers in the system and the levels in the system. So now, let's stop this for a second. Oh, 1 second. There's a chat. There's a question. The question is, wasn't the reason Moses didn't take them to Israel because of their own behavior? Absolutely, you're right. So here, it was an irrational complaint that they had. This is right after the situation with the spies. Everybody knew what happened, and everybody knew why they weren't going to Israel, and they knew it wasn't coming from Moses. It was coming from God. It was coming from God because of the behavior of the people. But as happens, especially in mob mentality, you just throw. And it kind of teaches us a little bit of what happens in humanity. The fact that it wasn't reasonable or rational doesn't mean it wasn't a complaint that did damage. Because when people are getting to an emotional place, and they're in this case, against the boss, they'll take whatever ammunition they have, and therefore they clearly made an unreasonable and an irrational complaint, but that wasn't it didn't fall flat as unreasonable. It just added to the pile of complaints. So again, it's not 100% clear. They're throwing a lot of smoke here. But what exactly did they want? We're not sure. So it's like this. Let's take a look at where we came up from last week. The Jews in the desert. They've gotten a Torah. Torah is a program for life. It's a lens on life. It's a perspective, and there's a lot of wisdom to be shared. And they did that in the desert. But first of all, it was really, what else did they have to do? They're, as we mentioned last week, they're getting food from heaven and manna. They're getting all their physical needs are being taken care of miraculously by God. So they don't pay mortgages. They don't have to go shopping. They don't do anything. They're everything they're taken care of. They study Torah. Aside from that, the Torah has a lot of mitzvahs, right? But most of those mitzvahs, how many can they do? The mitzvahs are functionally, many of them that can't be done until they have, what, and put a mezuzah on their tent. It has to be a real structure. So a lot of them are explicitly, when Moses tells them, says, when you come to the land, in other words, when you have normal lives, because these years in the desert are off the run. They're not normal. They're living on miracles. So when they're living on miracles as far as a physical level, what they're doing is they're investing themselves in spiritual pursuits and in Torah and study. So it's a time focused on Torah, not on mitzvahs as much. whatever they can. But it's really they're living in a spiritual cocoon, and they're dealing with the spirituality of Judaism. So let's look at the source notes. One of the things we says here, the Medrash says that the Torah was specifically given to those who ate the manna. What does that mean? They were living spiritual lives. They were not held back by the just the normal impediments we all have with physical life. Even if everybody on the Zoom would love to spend their entire day today and tomorrow studying Torah, we have things to take care of, right? Now, if you have a job, you don't have a job, but there are things that just don't allow us. Things we have to worry about and things we have to do. So you carve out time. The impediments weren't there. So the idea that God gave Torah to those who ate the manna, the Talmud's telling us, not that it's not given to us, but that when we want to try and carve out brain space, soul space, and concentration, like those, every once in a while, like those who ate the manna. When I'm sitting down to study, I shouldn't worry about things in the office or all of the texts or emails or WhatsApps are waiting for me. Try to devote myself like we've tried to devote ourselves like those who ate the manna. That's a lesson. But the point is that it was the reality of the time. They were living spiritual lives. So then, as we discussed last week, the spies said, "This is great. You want us to be connected to God. You want us to lead holy lives. This is what we're going to do. We want to stay in the desert. Don't take us to a land where we have to go become farmers and start worrying about plowing and planting and reaping and sowing and hustling and grabbing a few minutes to pray and study. This is much better for us." What did Moses tell them? What did the two spies who were loyal to God's command tell them last week? Said, "You got it wrong. Torah is not about us becoming angels. Torah is about us becoming leading meaningful human lives, and hiding from the human life, running away, and getting into climbing under your spiritual blanket. That's not what God wants to do. God wants us to engage the world, and Torah is a perspective and is a conduit through which we will be able to meaningfully engage the world, and that's what we should be doing. So it's yes, to have businesses and to do commerce and build homes. That's exactly what it is. You're afraid of it, but then what you're doing is you're running away from your own destiny. So that was really going to Israel was, as far as Torah tells us, what we were told last week, was a quantum leap forward. And if you look at number 8, the Rebbe says the fundamental advantage of living in the land of Israel in comparison to life in the desert was in the area of mitzvah observance. The Jews had less time and energy to invest in Torah study, but they advanced greatly in their ability to perform mitzvahs. So Judaically, going to Israel was much better than the desert. And that's what they told them. Now you get to do mitzvahs. Now the spies were afraid, as we say in 9, it said the land we passed through to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants. They were saying we're going to be consumed. If we have to deal with physicality, we have to deal with money and neighbors and cars and all of the glitz and appetites that come into your life, it'll eat us up. It'll swallow us. It'll swallow our attention. It'll swallow our personalities. They were afraid of that. But that was the challenge. The challenge was to go do mitzvahs. And we had last week, and I should have had it in a different sequence here. Caleb, who's one of the spies who was loyal to God's command, it says he silenced the people and said, "Go up. We can surely go up and inherit it, for we can indeed overcome it." We had it last week, and he says, "Go up" means that we'll leave, the desert. But the idea is surely go up means that we will be doing better than the desert. That the spiritual is a very important launching point, but the spiritual is a launching point for meaningful material life. That's where Torah takes us. And here in number 11, we have a Torah idea that the intellectual analysis isn't the primary goal, action is. So this is a very important Torah idea. That's fundamental and was part of their thinking, part of what the lesson that they got last week. The Torah says action speaks much louder than words. Even the words can be beautiful. So if someone needs help down the block, and we sit here and we feel for that person, we empathize with that person, we speak and we send our love. That's all great. Better than that is go and help them. Just go do something. So obviously, the sentiment and the action really should come together. But if it's the idea of one is, let's say, choosing what is the most important, the Talmud says action is the most important. There are questions as to, we make blessings on all mitzvahs, and one of the questions is, why don't you make a blessing over tzedakah, over charity? There's no mitzvah there. There's mitzvahs on everything. And one of the answers that our sages give us is, if you're about to give tzedakah, don't make the person wait an extra 5 seconds. Give it. You'll have your contemplation later. Meditations right now. Just do the right thing. So what Moses had said to the spies, and what Korach heard, and what the people heard, was that all this marinating in spiritual ideas in the desert, and really investing themselves in the spirituality, as beautiful, as uplifting, as holy as it was, it is eclipsed by the idea that they're going to have farms, and they're going to have businesses, and they're going to have guidance to do ethical business. They're going to actually have to sell that pound of apples in a way that is ethically honest, and they're going to have to figure out how to pay their bills properly while being honest with their clients or with their customers, and they have to live in real life and keep a moral perspective. That Moses is telling them, that's where it's at. That's called a step up, not a step down. Staying in the desert is staying in utero. It's staying in a spiritual holding pattern. And where Torah wants us to go is to go make a difference in the world of action. So therefore, if we go back to the share screen, take a look here in the Talmud on number 12. The Gemara discusses the method of Torah study. I a little too much here. The sages taught the following a piece from the Mishnah. What was the order of teaching the Torah, the oral law? How was the oral law first taught? Moshe learned directly from God's mouth. Aaron, so God teaches Moses the law of, let's say, putting up a mezuzah. Okay, Moses hears it straight from God, which must be amazing. Then God's revelation ceases. Moses calls in his brother Aaron. Aaron sets before him. Moses teaches him his lesson as he learned it from God. He's finished with that. We'll go through the rest of the leadership. Aaron's sons entered, and Moshe taught them the lesson. Well, Aaron listened. The elders entered. Moshe taught them their lesson. Elders moved aside, and the entire nation entered, and Moshe taught them their lesson. Therefore, Aaron had heard the lesson 4 times, the son heard it 3 times, elders heard it twice, and the entire nation heard it once. Okay. So, what does that mean? That what we have is there was clearly a structure, how God is teaching the Torah. The Torah is this source of wisdom and spirituality, and mitzvahs to the extent they can do it, but that there really wasn't that much focus on mitzvahs yet because they didn't have the opportunity. And it's clear Moses is top of the heap. He's hearing it directly from God, and then he gives it to Aaron, and then to the next, and he's sharing it, probably at different levels because of different capacities. When it comes to understanding, there's a myriad of levels. The diversity if you're teaching a lesson or sharing a thought with 20 people, it's probably going to land somewhat 20 different ways, because people come to it with their experience, their different approaches, there's a knowledge of background information. We're all different, which is a good thing. We're all different. And for the appreciation of the Torah was all different. Now, when it came to mitzvahs, let's look at this a second. Number 13 from the Rabbi. Torah is essential, functionally an intellectual exercise, which means that there will be a myriad of different approaches and levels to Torah study. And for any spiritual exercise, which is very subjective, it has the multiplicity of levels. Conversely, mitzvah observance doesn't lend itself to a myriad of levels. There's an inherent similarity between each person's practice. When Moses laid tefillin, he did it on the physical, functional level, the same way a spiritually simple Jew did the mitzvah. So if you think about it this way, let's say we got on this call into the Kabbalistic dynamics of what happens when we give charity. In our souls, in our connection with God, in the dynamics of our connection with humanity. And we speak about the beauty of the underlying, the cosmic beauty underlying the idea of giving $1 to a person in need. Now, if one of you takes that Kabbalistic knowledge, walks outside, there's someone in need, and you and a neighbor both each giving this person $1, they're putting together money for a need for God forbid, they don't have money, they need money for food for the family. You're giving $1. You have you just finished a real in-depth analysis of the beauty of the tzedakah, of what's going on. Yeah, it's $1, but there's so much going on in your mind, in your heart, in your soul as you hand the $1. Your neighbor, maybe saying, you need to buy a cantaloupe, $1. Without all the thoughts. Someone needs the money, they gave the money. So the difference in intent, in concentration, in focus, in spiritual import, the difference between the two, you giving the $1 and your neighbor giving the $1 is huge. One's giving $1 because I have $1 is not going to, change my life. Someone needs it to give it, and you're thinking about the holistic perspective. But there are only so many ways to give $1. You give $1. Both gave it exactly the same. The action is the same. Intent can be worlds apart, but action there's a way. You light a Shabbos candle. How many ways can you strike a match? You strike a match. You put it to the thing. Somebody has more intent. Someone has nostalgia. Someone has beauty and feeling. And somebody says, "Listen, this is what my grandmother used to do, and this is what I'm doing." It's the intent is going to be a huge diversity of intent, but the action is pretty much the same. So therefore, let's just go back to this a second. So this is what he's saying is, when Moses laid tefillin, he did it on the physical functional level the same way a spiritually simple Jew did the mitzvah. So then, thinking about it this way, what did Korach come to say? Well, the Rebbe offers this perspective. What did Korach? What was his challenge to Moses? He said, and remember, he's challenging Moses right after the spies. And if he had a challenge, if he had a problem with Moses' leadership, if he had a problem with Aaron being the high priest, he had a year to say something. Why all of a sudden does he come up with this now? Nothing new happened, except the story with the spies. So the Rebbe is saying, what happened with the spies? With the spies, in this episode of the spies, Moses taught the Jewish people that they were wrong for putting so much weight on the cognition, the spirituality, the meditation. He's saying, that's all great, but going to Israel and actually doing mitzvahs, that's where it's at. So Korach comes along and says, 1 second. Until now, I understood why you're at top of the heap. You know why? You speak to God. You know more of this than we do. And there's this chain of who has more connection spiritually and a knowledge of Torah. So of course, if Torah is where it's all at, then Torah knowledge is where it's all at, and you've got more. I surrender to that. But once you start speaking about how it's about the action is the main thing, why are you any better than anyone else? You do mitzvah the same way we do. So what makes you special? That was his challenge to Moses. And in a way, it's like a pendulum. They were putting too much emphasis on the beauty, on spirituality as being the be all and end all, and Torah as study being the be all and end all. They were so swept up in it feels great, and they loved living this way in the desert. And they said, this is where it's all at. So we don't want to go. It's all about, we want to stay in the desert and live and die here, just eating manna and studying Torah. And Moses said, no, that's not the point. The point is you have to go and live real life and do it meaningfully. So they went all the way to the other extreme. They're saying, oh, so what really matters is doing mitzvahs. Doing mitzvahs, we do it all the same. So if it's all about mitzvahs and not about cognition and spirituality, who needs you? What's so special? You give us the instructions, then we do it all the same. So what was the answer that Moses gave him? So let's take a look inside. In the Torah portion, it says, Moses said to Korach, to all his company, saying, in the morning, God will make known. In the morning, which is an interesting thing. He said that there's going to be a miracle. You're going to see that God chose me. But why in the morning? Most of the Torah instructions happen during the day. Why did it have to wait a day? He needs an answer. People need an answer. There's a rebellion going on in the camp. What's this business in the morning? Or even again, Torah doesn't tell us a lot of details. I mean, God will make known. We don't need to know if it was morning, what time it was. We'll know that God, which Torah says, God works a miracle and shows that Moses' attitude is correct. There seems to be an emphasis on morning. And then there's something else which seems to be a little bit out of character, out of off the run a little bit. It said, Rashi, it should have said Rashi here. Sorry. In the morning, the Lord will make known who is his for the Levitic services. Who is challenging Levitic services? What does that have to do with anything? So, what the Rebbe offered is like this. When it comes to mitzvahs, yes, mitzvahs are the actions the main thing. And therefore, like I said before, use an example of giving tzedakah. What we're thinking, the person needs money to be able to buy food for their family. Our intent is not as important as the fact that we're giving it. That's what matters. If someone's in need, we're helping them. Now, between us and God, that is our intent. But the focus is definitely on the action. At the same time, there is something to be said, something important to be said about our intent. In Torah law, and this can sound a little extreme to you, because it is, I think, if I lost $1 outside, I don't know, I lost it, I don't know, and a poor person picks it up and buys food for their family, I have some credit for tzedakah. I didn't do anything. I didn't mean anything. My assets helped someone else. There's something of a mitzvah, lowercase m. There's something there. So there's a point is that a mitzvah, and this is what Moses answered them. A mitzvah is powerful, but a mitzvah itself can be a shining mitzvah, or it can be a mitzvah with a lowercase m, not so shining. Or in the words, and I didn't bring this in the quotes, but I think I've done it in the past. In the founder of Chabad, in his foundational book Tanya, he brings that the Zohar writes that every mitzvah is like a bird, and the action is the body of the bird, and the sentiment the love, the respect, the sense of responsibility we put into the mitzvah, that is the wings, and that lifts it aloft. That's a nice imagery for me, anyway. So Rabbi Shmuel Zalman, the founder of Chabad, writes, let's delve into that a little bit. What happens if there's a wingless bird? A bird, any animal, in order for it to be kosher, has to be a kosher species. It also has to be healthy. So, the Jewish law says that not having wings is not a mortal deficiency, and therefore a wingless bird, it was born crippled. That it doesn't have wings. It's still potentially it's a kosher bird. You have to check, but it is a kosher bird. The wings are not a deficiency that makes it treif. So he says, if you have the body without the wings, in other words, you have the mitzvah without proper intent, it's a mitzvah. It's a bird. It's not flying. It's not lifted aloft. It doesn't have the sentiment, but a bird it is. So even if someone does something without intent, or let's say a person does a mitzvah because they want to look good to their neighbors, or whatever. I mean, there's so many possible intentions that are not holy and pure for doing a mitzvah, and that are not certainly not shining souls of a mitzvah. But the mitzvah is the mitzvah. If someone gave millions of dollars to a hospital to have their name up in lights, and that's really what they wanted, that's between them and God. Meanwhile, people are benefiting. A mitzvah is a mitzvah. What Moshe told them, said as though, don't get carried away with this pendulum saying that it's only about the action. It's not only about the action. It's what you put into the action does matter. We want it to be a shining mitzvah. We want it to be a glorious mitzvah, right? You have a loved one and you do something for them. It's not only they needed this and you checked it off the list. If you did it graciously, you did it showing a sentiment of connection. Those things matter. The soul to that body of a mitzvah matters. So, as the Rebbe offered, second. So take a look at this. It's not from him actually. It's from prior. So there is an expression we find in the Talmud a good number of times where mitzvahs are referred to as good deeds. Ma'asim tovim. I just picked one from the Talmud. It says, when a man passes away, there accompany him neither gold nor silver, nor precious stones nor pearls, but Torah and good deeds alone. In other words, when we pass on, what we take with us is our Torah and our mitzvahs. So the Rebbe asked about this. In referring to deeds, which in context obviously mean mitzvahs, we don't just call them deeds. Why doesn't it say what matters? What we take with us when we pass on is our Torah and our actions. And obviously the Torah and the negative actions don't go. We're not talking about that. They're the mitzvahs we do. So we don't just call them deeds. We call them good deeds. What does that mean? It means there's a concept of mitzvahs which don't merit the appellation good. There are mitzvahs. They're not bad, but they're not so good. They're not done with proper caring, intent, focus. Because mitzvahs are meant to increase light in the world. And it's possible that a mitzvah action done without proper intent will lack illumination. So his point is that Moses was telling Korach that you think that it's only going to Israel is only about action, and you're right. And action, I don't put on tefillin differently than anyone else. We don't light Shabbos candles any differently. But it's not. It's about what we're going to call the light, the spiritual illumination. And that's what he said, wait till morning. Morning, the message was, they said, there is such a thing as the sun, the illumination of a mitzvah. And the illumination of a mitzvah means when we do something is that I care. I care That's charity. It's because I care about the person. I care about my responsibility to humanity, my responsibility to God, responsibility to my community. I care. That flipping a dollar because someone's in your face and getting rid of them is still a mitzvah. But the empathy, the concern, the love, the sense of wanting to be who God wants us to be, that is the shining soul of a mitzvah. And a mitzvah doesn't necessarily have to have a shining soul. And therefore, what Moshe was teaching the Jewish people, and why this is one reason this is such a fundamental story for us going forward, is for the balance and trying to flesh out what Torah wants of us. Torah wants of us to lead a life where we know we need to make a difference in the material world. Don't run away from it. But that difference is not just a task list. We have functions which are gestures of love and caring to God and to each other, to ourselves. We want to channel connection. And that's one of the things that I mentioned before. Over here it said, for the Levitic services. Why did he bring in the Levitic services here? In the name Levi, remember, this is the tribe of Levi. They're all Levites. Korach is a Levite, Moses is a Levite. They're all from the Levi family. Where does the name Levi come from? Levi was Jacob and the son of Jacob and Leah. Leah gave him the name, the baby. So back in Genesis, when the Levi's birth is described, it says she conceived again. This was her third son, Leah's. And she said, now this time my husband will be attached to me. For I born him 3 sons, therefore he named him Levi. Leah did not feel the adequate love and connection from Jacob, who had been tricked into marrying her. Remember that saga? And here what she's saying is, now that I'm giving him 3 sons, hopefully he's going to love me, which is tragic in its own way. But that's not for the conversation today. But what does Levi mean? Attached. It means a bond. That's where the name Levi comes from. That there'll be a connection. The job of the Levi was to help us as a people feel connected to God and be connected to God. The very concept of Levi was about introducing this sense of relationship and strengthening this sense of relationship within us and between us and God, between us and each other. That's what Levi represents. That's what the name represents. So that Rashi was saying, as it was pointing out when he said the Levitic services, Moshe was saying to Korach, this is who we are. You're a Levi. The whole purpose is to help people feel and not just do robotic mechanic mitzvahs. That's not, it's, yes, if you mechanically helped a poor person, good, but the shining mitzvah is maybe if you not only give him a dollar, you also give him a hug. If you recognize that with this you are contributing to God's world, that there's some emotion, there's some feeling, there's some spirituality, there's some love. Said the bond. Levi means a bond. It means a connection. It means an attachment. The action itself is going to form an attachment in action, but we're a lot more complicated than just our actions. We are thinking and feeling human beings, and we want, through our actions, we want our actions to be a conduit, a venue through which our minds and our hearts, our intellect and our emotions are also in gear and connecting with others or with God. So the balance in the Korach, these two Torah portions, like they seem to go together in the pendulum way. Last week, we're taught that don't get caught up just in spirituality and say you got to do mitzvahs. And then this week we're saying don't just focus on doing. You have to feel. We get up in the morning we pray, we think, meditate. So yes, that's a little cocoon, spiritual cocoon. Maybe that's our half an hour in the desert, so to speak, mana time. But then we got to go out of the desert and live a life. But it shouldn't be just out of the desert and leave the desert behind. We want to take the inspiration with us, so that when we're interacting and when we're leading our lives, the sense of connection and relationship that we were able to foster in the morning in our quote unquote desert time, we bring it to bear to infuse that into the actions we do. And I guess that's one of the reasons that we pray 3 times a day, because it's hard to lead a meaningful life on the steam of just one of those desert opportunities. Afternoon comes, we need a little refresher. Communing time between us and God to be able to get our minds and our emotions back in gear and focus, so that we can not only do the right thing, but infuse what we're doing with the proper attitudes and emotions. And then we do the same thing at night to wrap up the day. So I'll leave that here unless there are any questions. Going hot. All right. Have a great week. I'm actually not next week. I won't be able to be here. I'll send that email. So I'll keep you posted. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be
Thank
well.
you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.